Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so today we are continuing our look at the history of the Pokémon Trading Card Game, and we're going to be looking at the Heartgold Soulsilver Unleashed expansion. Now, this was the second expansion in the Heartgold Soulsilver set, which of course were released to commemorate the re-release of the Gold and Silver games, which were of course called Heartgold Soulsilver. Now, I've already done my run through of Heartgold Soulsilver, the Heartgold Soulsilver base set as it is sometimes called, and there is a link to that in the description of this particular video. So, quite frankly, have a look at that if you want a little bit of context about that. Today, we are looking at Unleashed, and I'm going to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the best set ever, but there's two reasons you should not turn off. There are two reasons why you should keep watching. Number one, we're still talking about Pokemon cards, and they're awesome. And number two, how is your history going to be complete if you don't learn about Unleashed? And of course, if you want a third reason, there were some genuinely good cards. So we're going to start off, we're going to do a top 10 here, but shall we say we ain't going to spend too long on the first five. We're going to go at a bit of a clip. We don't need to spend very long. So at number 10, Blastoise and Floatzel. We'll look at them as a pair. Now, Blastoise had a nice little ability Washout. As often as you like during your turn, you may move a water energy attached to one of your bench Pokemon to your active Pokemon. And weirdly, and this doesn't happen anymore, but back in the day, there was a standard thing whereby if you had, because it was abilities rather than, no, it wasn't, sorry, it was Poke Powers rather than abilities, it couldn't be used for, it couldn't be used as long as they were affected by a special condition. So that was one of the things. And we had Floatzel. Once during your turn, you may attach a water energy from your hand to Floatzel, and cannot be used if Floatzel is affected by a special condition, i.e. Floatzel allowed you to double attack. So who did a double attach, I should say. So with whom do you attach? You attack with Blastoise. Now we've got double colourless energy, as I spoke about in the Heartgold Soulsilver set review, history video, etc. So with Blastoise, you do 100 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon on the bench or otherwise. And we talked in the Heartgold Soulsilver video about the lower HP people generally had. And you put 2 water energy back into your hand. And then, of course, next turn, you would attach 1 energy as normal to Blastoise, because you know you've got 2 in your hand. You would attach an extra energy to Floatzel using his ability, or Poke Power as it was back then, and then you would use Blastoise's Poke Power to move that second energy back to Blastoise, and you would be able to do Hydro Launcher every single turn. Let's not forget the baby Pokemon I mentioned in the Heartgold Soulsilver video, who would sit in the active and stop you attacking. So you could hit the bench and leave that stupid Clefairy asleep. It was a fun little deck. You can see the synergy. It's a stage 2. You need the DCE and you need these 2 energy attachments per turn. It was a kind of deck that was fun to play at League, but it was never particularly good. And I'm sorry if that sounds a little bit mean, but it just wasn't. Sorry about that. So let's move on and have a quick chat about Jirachi at number 9. Let's say number 9. And again, I've got a little pair of Pokemon here. I'm cheating a bit because apart from the top 5, this set was kind of underwhelming. Now, he had an interesting ability, or Poke Power, Stardust Song. Once during your turn, when you put Jirachi onto your bench, flip 3 coins. For each heads, attach a Psychic Energy from your discard pile to Jirachi. Now, we've mentioned him in a couple videos, and he's coming up in this one. Shaman from Unleashed then would allow you to move those energy anywhere you like on the field. You could use it to move the energy around. It was very useful indeed. So it was nice energy acceleration. I actually used this Jirachi at the European Challenge Cup, the biggest tournament in Europe, in 2012, with the newly released Mewtwo EX and Regigigas EX from Next Destinies, and I actually made 33rd and bubbled Top Cut with a 6-2 record. So Jirachi holds a special place in my heart, but let's not go crazy, ladies and gentlemen. He wasn't amazing. Miss Magius also gets lumped in at number 9 because it's another Pokemon that played around with Psychic Energy. Once during your turn, you may move a psychic energy attached to one of your Pokemon to another of your Pokemon. And again, if you're affected by a special condition, can't be used. Now, this was used in a few things. My good friend Tommy Roberts used this with Terrakion from Noble Victories. Terrakion had that attack that did 90 damage for a fighting and a colourless, as long as something had been KO'd the previous turn. So you would use this to move a psychic energy to Terrakion, attach a fighting energy, and off you go. They were useful little cards, they were kind of fun, but they were far from amazing, and that's why they come in at number 9. At number 8, Torterra. Now, at first glimpse, Torterra looks a bit rubbish. It's a stage 2, and it's not particularly great. Now, it's got this Giga Drain attack, which for free energy, or 2 if you use a double colourless energy, does 40 damage, and you got to remove from Torterra the number of damage counters equal to the damage you did to the defending Pokemon. Now, back then, obviously, we had cards like Reshiram Prime, who would absolutely destroy Torterra. But other cards like that they weren't always able to hit 142 easily. And back then we had cards like Plus Power, so you could add 10 damage, and of course with this particular card you would then heal an extra 10 damage. And we had Expert Belt, which was a card that added 20 HP, so you went up to 160. And you did 20 more damage, so you would heal 20 more damage. So you could be doing 60, 70, 80 damage a turn while healing 80 damage per turn from 160 HP Pokemon that not every deck could KO. Now, like I've said, if you come across a fire deck like Reshiram, goodbye, nice to see you. But it was alright, and like I say, it was far from amazing. It was not the best card by any stretch of the imagination, but if I remember correctly, I want to say it won German Nationals, or at least it had a good run. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, if you can go and win a national championship, that's pretty good going. It's not an amazing card, it was a niche deck that saw a little bit of success here or there, but in a weaker set, a niche deck that was kind of fun and saw a bit of success, certainly more than Blastoise Floatzel ever did, that means that it's good enough to pop in at number 8. In at number 7, we have Tyranitar Prime, a rare free attack Pokemon. Now, this was kind of good, and it saw a fair bit of play here and there. Now, I liked playing against Tyranitar, because I've made no secret of my love for Donphan Prime, and Tyranitar is fighting weak, but he had some fun little attacks. So for 1 Dark Energy, I know 160 HP back then was pretty beefy. For 1 Dark Energy, 20 damage to each Pokemon in play, yours and your opponent's, excluding any Dark Pokemon. Which, of course, was very interesting, because Larvitar and Pupitar could be fighting Pokemon, so it was very interesting that until you fully evolved, you might have to be doing damage to your own unevolved Pokemon. Little bit annoying, but there we go. Although, of course, there's always ways to mitigate this damage. You could, for a Dark and a double colourless, 60 damage, not affected by Poke Powers, Poke Bodies, or any effects on the defending Pokemon, meh. And then your big attack for 2 Dark and a double colourless, 120, discard the top 3 cards of your deck. And back then, ladies and gentlemen, with SP running rampant, 120 damage was pretty gosh darn good. Now, it could take a little while to get up with 4 energy on the stage 2, but he had a lot of HP, he tended to last for a little while, he could get big one-hit KOs, and to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, Darkness Howl was not a terribly bad attack. And at number 6, before we get into the good Pokemon, let's have a look at Steelix Prime. Now, Steelix Prime, now we're getting into the beginning of cards that actually saw a fair amount of play. Steelix Prime was for a while a fairly good deck, and there's a few reasons for this. Firstly, it's got a poker body, which means it cannot be affected by special conditions. For those that don't remember, and I've kind of made reference to this already, nowadays we have abilities. We used to have poker powers and poker bodies. Poker powers were active things that you had to actually do, and poker bodies were passive things that just kind of happened. He couldn't be affected by special conditions. It's passive, it's always there. It's a poker body. Now, We also had special metal energy, which meant that any damage done to Steelix was reduced by 10. And if you could have 3 or 4 special metal on Steelix, because special energy you can have 4 in your deck, then you're reducing it by 30 or 40. Then, of course, you've got expert bouts, so we've got 160 HP Pokemon, can't be affected by special conditions, and you're reducing damage done with special metal energy. Now we're talking. And this was very much a tank deck. For a double colourless energy, 30 damage, search your discard pile for an energy card and attach it to Steelix. And what was really good about that was it said energy card, not basic energy. So that means that double colourless, which you can see from the energy cost was quite important, could be gotten with energy stream. Special metal energy that we've just talked about and is important could be gotten with energy stream. And then Gaia Crush does 100 for 5 energy. It's expensive, but of course energy stream really helped. And as I keep saying, back then 100 damage was pretty good. For, all these XP Pokemon like Luxray and Garchomp, at least before they level X'd, did not have 100 HP. Then, of course, remember that you would have Expert Bout attached to Steelix pretty much all the time. You're doing 120, and SP were the big Pokemon at the time, and you're KOing all of those in one hit. The big problem with Steelix, of course, well, as soon as you one-hit KO it, that's it. The game's basically over. And we see that fire weakness, and I keep mentioning Reshiram. There is a reason Reshiram was so high up in my list of top 10 cards from Heartgold Soulsilver. It was very, very good. It saw a huge amount of play. It was, at least very strongly, arguably, I'm pretty sure that's a real sentence, the best deck in the format. So something like a Reshiram could take down this Steelix. However, it had tanking ability, and that means it's good enough to come in at number 6. And that brings us up to number 5, Kingdra Prime. Now this is where, as far as I'm concerned, this set starts to get pretty gosh darn good. Now, don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen, Kingdra Prime was not the best card ever. What Kingdra Prime was a very useful card and one that saw a whole bunch of play. Now, first of all, it had a pretty good ability. The kind of ability that nowadays would be seen. Now, admittedly, we can look at this and go, oh, it's a stage 2. Is anyone going to play the stage 2 for the ability? Well, at the time, or at least for part of its lifetime, we had cards like Broken Time Space that allowed you to go right away. And we had Rare Candy that, again, for a time, allowed you to evolve straight away. So you could go basic Rare Candy stage 2 on the first turn of the game. So the poker power in that respect was very, very good. You just put a damage counter on. Again, you couldn't use it if it was affected by a special condition, but you could basically just go boom, 10 damage anywhere on the field. Think of how useful cards like Golbat and Crobat are nowadays. Now imagine you can have, if you've got say 2 Kingdra in play, that's 20 damage wherever you want every single turn. Not just when you evolve. And let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, that you could put the 10, if you've got 2 of them out, that's 20 damage, or 2 damage counters, but they don't have to be on the same Pokemon, which was exceptionally good. It also had a really good low-maintenance attack, which was Dragon Steam. 60 damage for a single energy. So if you got Kingdra Prime going nice and fast, then you could do 10 damage wherever you wanted with the ability, and then for a single energy, you got to go ahead and do an extra 60 damage. And that is really quite good. Now, Kingdra Prime was rarely good enough on its own. There's a couple reasons for this. First among them being, well, you only get to do 20 if there's a fire Pokemon in play. But there was a Legend Awakens Kingdra that saw a bit of play with this. So for now Aqua Stream, now it might look a little bit weird. You can see there next to Aqua Stream there's kind of like a hole. Now I explained this in my Heartgold Soulsilver video. These were free attacks that cost 0 energy. Search your discard pile for as many water energy cards as you like. Show them to your opponent, shuffle them into your deck. This attack does 10 damage for each water energy card you choose. Pretty gosh darn useful. And the attack Dragon Pump did 40 damage, but in reality it did 60 damage, plus 20 to one of the bench, because you were always going to discard 2 cards from your hand. And of course, the ideal is that you discard water energy from your hand and then you aqua stream them back in. Now, fire Pokemon are generally weak to water, i.e. in any time when you ended up facing down a fire deck and Kingdra Prime wasn't good enough, Kingdra from Legends Awakened picked up the slack. Another card that saw a bit of play with Kingdra was Machamp. The theory again being, well, anytime you're really struggling with Kingdra, Machamp can come in. Two powerful Pokemon that can cover each other a little bit. Now, Machamp didn't particularly fix the problem of fire Pokemon or anything like Legends Awakened Kingdra did. It was just a powerful Stage 2, and if you're playing a Stage 2 engine and 4 rare candy, why not, ladies and gentlemen? Why not? We're going to talk more about Machamp in our next video. I think our next one is going to be Stormfront, because when I did EX Delta Species, I asked in the comments if there was a particular set you wanted me to look at, and the overwhelming favourite so far has been Stormfront. More about Machamp in that particular video. Going up into number 4, we have Judge. Now, I don't need to speak too much about Judge because it was actually reprinted fairly recently. And this was a card that a lot of people were happy to see come back in Breakthrough. Now, what Judge does is it forces each player to shuffle their hand into their deck and draw 4 cards. Nowadays, Judge is being largely used as disruption. You play a turn 1 Judge and your opponent starts with 4 cards in their hand rather than potentially 6 that they might have if they, for instance, start 1 basic and then 6 other cards, because you start with an opening hand of 7. But there were other reasons this was used. There was a Sableye deck that was used for a while, and I'm not going to go into great detail about the Sableye deck, but it was called Sable Lock, and it would revolve around Sableye, and Sableye had, amongst other things, a nice attack which allowed you to use a supporter in your deck as the attack. Why was that good? Well, you could get a turn 1 Judge, and then you could get your opponent's hand down to very few cards, and then you could use cards like Cyrus's Initiative, which was another card it's been gone for a little while, but it was a useful little card. It came around in Supreme Victors, and if you could flip 2 heads, you could shuffle 2 cards from your opponent's hand into their deck. Theory being, of course, you put them down to a 4-card hand with Judge, and then Cyrus's Initiative comes in. I don't have time in this video to go through this Sable Lock deck in a huge amount of detail, but suffice it to say, you got your opponent down to a very small hand, and then you could use cards like Luxray or Garchomp or other such, shall we say, efficient low-energy Pokemon to pick away at your opponent while they sat there with nothing. Another card that saw a lot of play with Judge was Yanmega, and the reason is that Yanmega had an ability, or Pokebody, I should say. This was from Triumphant Insight. If you have the same number of cards in hand as your opponent, he has no attack cost. So you could do 40 damage to any bench Pokemon, or any Pokemon, but you generally use it for the bench, because if you want to hit the active, you can do 70 with Sonic Boom. Not hitting for weakness, which was a slight annoyance, because what resists grass? Seriously, answers in the comment section. But linear attack doing 40 to the bench was really good because, as I keep saying, at the time, baby Pokemon were a thing. They had 30 HP, so if your opponent had a baby Pokemon on the bench, linear attack got a free KO. Sonic Boom 70 for 0 damage on a stage 1 when cards like Broken Time Space are in the format. Really, really quite useful. So Yanmega, really good. How do you make sure you got the same number of cards in hand as your opponent? You play Judge, and then both players are guaranteed to have 4 cards in their hand. Judge was a really useful card for things like Yanmega, for things like Sable Lock, and just for disrupting your opponent. When it rotated, people missed it, and it was only when Breakthrough came in and it came back that we got it back. Number 3, Entei Raikou Legend. And this might be a card which takes a little bit of explanation, because it's a legend card, and those of you that weren't playing, now this was a new thing that came in Heartgold Soulsilver, those of you that weren't playing at the time might not remember these. They were 2 cards, and in order to play this card, you had to play both halves of the legend at one time. Now in Heartgold Soulsilver we saw Ho-Oh, we saw Lugia, but starting in Unleashed we saw pairs. So Entei Raikou Legend, 2 Pokemon, and when it got knocked out, your opponent took 2 prizes. Now it had 2 attacks, but really it was Thunderfall that was particularly good. It did 80 damage to each Pokemon in play. This is yours and your opponent's, that had a poker power. Now, why is that particularly good? Well, might I remind you, ladies and gentlemen, of Uxie, and Uxie from Legends Awaken was played in basically every deck. It had 70 HP, it was a one-hit KO. We're going to talk about Shaymin in a minute from Unleashed. Shaymin had 70 HP. It was a one-hit KO. Now, in the next set, we would get Smeargle in Undaunted. Smeargle had 70 HP. Now, we also saw in basically every deck, because it was so gosh darn good, we had Claydol from Great Encounters, which had 80 HP. Which means when you used this attack, it KO'd. Now, you had to be careful of your own prizes, but remember, as long as you could KO, as long as you could win the game without giving your opponent their final prize, you could KO a couple on your side of the field. Every Uxie, every Claydol, every Smeargle, it was ludicrous. And it took just 2 energy to do so. Now, something else is worth noting here, it had double weakness. It was weak to water because of Entei, and it was weak to fighting because of Raikou. But this was a game ender, ladies and gentlemen. You would play it down and you would try and get something like an energy switch, or you could even use something like a Miss Magius, I suppose. You would want to bench it both parts at once. You would then, and it only took up 1 bench space, you would then want to get both energy on in a single turn. I mean, Magnezone Prime would be quite good here, because Magnezone Prime, which actually did see quite a lot of play with Yanmega, that was a deck for quite some time, came out in Triumphant a couple of sets later. Now, this will allow you to draw extra cards. There were obviously other Magnezones that let you put down energy as much as you liked. For instance, Magnezone saw a lot of play with Emboar. Now that we're going a few sets in the future to black and white here. But I believe there were just a small window where it was all legal, and you could use Inferno Fandango to put extra energy down. Here's the point, ladies and gentlemen. If you could get 2 energy on it in one go, you could win the game. You could take 3 or 4 prizes, and that, ladies and gentlemen, was ludicrous. In at number 2, and I don't need to say too much about this card because we've already mentioned it a couple of times, it is Shaymin. The attack was garbage, but it's the ability or the poker power Celebration Wind. You may move as many energy attached to your Pokemon as you like to any of your other Pokemon. Now, this wasn't you can move from one to another. Any energy attached to your Pokemon to your other Pokemon. It was really, really strong. Really, really strong. And it saw a huge amount of play. And it became a staple. It was kind of a one-of in almost every deck. But I will give you one other card that saw a lot of play with this, and that was Pachirisu. Pachirisu from Call of Legends had a brilliant ability, or poker power, Self-Generation. Talking about Self-Generation, you're welcome. Where you could put him onto the bench, and while you did so, attach an extra 2 lightning energy to Pachirisu. So what you would do is you would bench Pachirisu with 2 extra energy, and then you would use Shaymin to move those energy wherever you wanted. After Black and White came out, you would see Zekrom. So another combo which really hit its stride, not unlike the Magnezone Emboar with Entei Raikou Legend, Pachirisu Shaymin Zekrom. It was a deck that could do 120 damage, and remember we had plus power at the time, so you could do a huge amount of damage on turn 1. My good friend Tommy Roberts, second mention in one video, you're welcome, he went to a tournament I believe in Germany at one point, and he started the tournament 6-0, donking, that's knocking out your opponent's only Pokemon on turn 1 for the first 6 games. He donked 6 games in a row. This is when you could attack if you were going first. It was ludicrous, ladies and gentlemen. And that brings me to my number 1 card from Unleashed. It's Duel Ball. Duel Ball was really, really good and really, really frustrating in equal measure. Flip 2 coins for each head, search your deck for a basic Pokemon, show it to your opponent and put it into your hand. And in a format where cards like Uxie and Smeargle and Shaman, etc., were that gosh darn good and all basic, most every deck played Duel Ball. It was crazy good. Now, there would be times you'd hit double tails and it would be very sad. There would be times you would hit double heads and you would be very happy. On average, this would get you one basic Pokemon, and you know what? A lot of the time, ladies and gentlemen, that was good enough. Duel Ball was a staple in almost every deck, and though it's not maybe as exciting as something like Entei, Raikou, Legend, or Shaman, for that reason, it is the best card in Unleashed. It did see a reprint in Call of Legends, but it is, ladies and gentlemen, now gone. And the reason I think this is the best card in the format is the same reason I put Pokemon Collector as the best card in the set of Heartgold Soulsilver. It's very simply because if this card were reprinted in our next set, which I think is called Fates Collide, if this was reprinted in Fates Collide, it would instantly see play in basically every deck. We have a basic heavy format at the moment. Being able to play a Duel Ball and go ahead and grab maybe a Hooper and another basic as well would just be redonkulous, and that's why it gets our number 1 card. So a bit of a slow start for this set, ladies and gentlemen. I think the top 5 is worth talking about, and we got to look at some old cards and learn some Pokemon TCG history, and as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty gosh darn good. Now, you know the deal, ladies and gentlemen. You've had about 27 minutes to click that like button. If you haven't done so already, I will be willing to forgive you as long as you click it now. I'll wait. Excellent. Now, if you haven't subscribed, I would highly, highly recommend that you go and do so. And if you have subscribed, as quite frankly you should have by now, go get a friend to subscribe as well. It would make me a happy boy. And, of course, if you've got any comments to make, put them down below. Some things you might want to comment include, are there any cards from Unleashed that you think I unfairly dismissed? Are there any cards that you think I've rated too highly? Do you have your own complete top 10 from Unleashed that you would like to show me? And of course, as always, if you would like to request a set for me to have a look at in this TCG history series, chuck it down in the comments. I will get to it, hopefully, fairly shortly. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, by far the most important thing, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. Look after yourselves till next time. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.